As we're all under house arrest at the moment, Manchester University Press has asked me to do this video to tell you about my new book. Well, here it is. Beyond Observation, A History of Authorship in Ethnographic Film. Now, this is a book that covers a lot of ground. From the 1890s, the birth of cinema, until more or less 2015. It covers films made in a broad variety of styles in many different parts of the world. From the Arctic to Australia, from urban China to rural Vermont. There are many names that you'll be familiar with. Robert Flaherty, Edward Curtis, Basil Wright, Mead and Bateson, after the war, John Marshall, Jean Rouch, of course, Robert Gardner, the beginnings of observational cinema as represented by the work of David and Judith MacDougall and Gary Kildare. Then there's a chapter on indigenous media, represented particularly by the Video in the Villages project in Brazil, and 3 chapters on the remarkable phenomenon in British TV when commercial television invested at least £10 million in making films based on ethnographic research. In the last part of the book, I deal with some more recent works, including the extraordinary films that have been produced by the Sensory Ethnography Lab in Harvard, and more participatory films, which I think hold the key to the future of the genre. But there may also be some works that you don't know, particularly from the early period, such as the remarkable films that the Pate Gaumont newsreel operators made all over the world before the First World War, or the films made by the Kulturfilm makers in the Soviet Union in a brief period before they were stamped on by Stalin. And unless you're British in a certain age, you probably don't realise just how rich the back catalogue of films are that were made for British TV in the last 2 decades of the last century. But despite covering a lot of ground in this regard, it's still a very partial book, and I'm only too aware that there are other traditions in China, Japan, and closer to home even, Latin America, Scandinavia, that other people will have to deal with in other books. But it's also a partial book in the sense that it comes at the phenomenon of ethnographic film from a very specific angle. And this is where the title of the book, Beyond Observation, comes into play. Because there has been a tendency to think of the history of ethnographic film as being a whole succession of ways of looking. And I argue that it should be better thought of as a series of ways of doing. And the particular way that you do ethnographic films is what makes an ethnographic film ethnographic. And this is a rather different point of view from the long-standing orthodoxy that authorship and ethnographic quality were in some sense in a terrible zero-sum equation, that the more you had of one, the less you had of the other. I argue rather that it's a particular form in which you do films that makes them ethnographic, rather than the absence of authorship. Anyway, you'll have to judge for yourselves. Although it's a long book, it isn't comprehensive or definitive, but I hope that it'll give you a sense of the path through the forest. In that sense, I hope you'll find it useful both for your own research and for your students. The great thing is that you can get this book entirely gratis and for free by downloading it from the Manchester University Press website. But if you really would like to have a hard copy, they produced it, I think, in a really rather beautiful form as a paperback at a very reasonable price. Good reading. Goodbye.